The group text arrived while I was teaching a watercolor class to my Thursday afternoon seniors, a simple screenshot of my sister's wedding invitation posted to the family chat with hearts and celebration emojis from everyone. Everyone except me, because I hadn't received an invitation at all. 27 years of sisterhood evaporated in the time it took my phone screen to load, revealing that my own family had deliberately excluded me from what they were calling the event of the year. What seemed like a simple oversight would soon expose a lifetime of calculated favoritism, financial manipulation, and the painful truth about my place in a family I'd spent decades trying to please. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at that screenshot for a full minute while Mrs. Patterson asked me a question about shading techniques that I couldn't process. The invitation was elegant, cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering announcing the marriage of my younger sister Vanessa Hartley to Bradford Cunningham III at the Rosewood Estate in Charleston. 2 months away. Black tie optional. Adults-only reception to follow. The room suddenly felt too warm, too small. I excused myself, leaving my dozen elderly students mid-brushstroke, and locked myself in the community center's tiny supply closet. My hands shook as I scrolled through the family chat, counting responses. Both parents, enthusiastic. My older brother Derek and his wife, confirming attendance. Our Aunt Prudence, Uncle Gordon, cousins I barely knew, all responding with variations of, wouldn't miss it, and, so excited. 43 messages. Not one directed at me. Not one person asking, did Natalie get hers yet? I called my mother directly, my heart hammering against my ribs. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice bright with the particular cheerfulness she reserved for her public persona. Natalie, darling, I'm at the country club. Can this wait? Did Vanessa send me a wedding invitation? I asked, bypassing pleasantries entirely. A pause. Too long. Then, carefully, oh, sweetheart. I thought Vanessa had spoken with you about this. The casual deflection, the implication that this was a conversation I should have already had, sent ice through my veins. Spoken with me about what, exactly? Another pause. I could hear voices in the background, the clink of glasses, someone laughing. My mother's world, the one I'd never quite fit into despite 20 years of trying. The wedding is going to be quite intimate, she said finally, her voice dropping to that particular tone she used when delivering disappointing news as if it were actually a favor. Vanessa and Bradford wanted to keep it to immediate family and their closest circle. You understand. I am immediate family, I said quietly, though something was building in my chest, not quite anger yet, but close. I'm her sister. Of course you are, darling. But given everything with the divorce last year, and your situation, Vanessa thought it might be uncomfortable for you. All the wedding talk, the romance, the family dynamics. She was trying to be considerate. My situation. The phrase hung between us, loaded with everything my mother would never say directly. My divorce from Tyler after he'd emptied our joint accounts and disappeared to Portland with a woman he'd met at a cryptocurrency conference. My subsequent move from our suburban home into a modest apartment near the river. My shift from marketing director to part-time art instructor at the community center while I rebuilt my finances and figured out my next move. My situation meant I no longer fit the Hartley family image of success, stability, and social standing. Mom, that's not considerate. That's exclusion. Don't be dramatic, Natalie. You're making this about you when it's Vanessa's special day. She has a right to celebrate however she chooses. And honestly, given how difficult you've been about family events lately, always making excuses about why you can't attend, I think she assumed you wouldn't want to come anyway. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost questioned my own perception. Had I been difficult? I'd missed Christmas last year because I'd been working double shifts to cover rent after Tyler's theft. I'd skipped Easter because I couldn't afford the expensive brunch my mother always insisted on hosting at the Harbor Club. I declined the summer gathering at their lake house because I'd been dealing with the emotional aftermath of discovering Tyler had been planning his exit for over a year. But difficult? No. Surviving was not the same as being difficult. I need to go, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. My class is waiting. Natalie, don't make a scene about this. If you're upset, call Vanessa directly and discuss it like adults. But please, for once, try not to create drama where there doesn't need to be any. She disconnected before I could respond. I stood in that supply closet, surrounded by easels and dried-up paint tubes, and felt something crack open inside me. Not my heart exactly, that had been broken before. This was different, deeper. It was the shattering of a fundamental illusion I'd carried my entire life, that family meant unconditional inclusion, that blood created obligation, that love existed beneath the surface dysfunction even if it wasn't always visible. My phone buzzed. A private message from my brother Derek. Sorry you're finding out this way. Mom said Vanessa was going to talk to you weeks ago. For what it's worth, I think it's messed up. But you know how Mom gets about Vanessa's vision for things. The casual acknowledgement that this was wrong, paired with complete inaction, somehow hurt more than the exclusion itself. Derek knew. Everyone knew. And no one had said anything. I returned to my classroom, apologized to my students for the interruption, and somehow made it through the remaining 40 minutes of instruction. Mrs. Patterson showed me her completed landscape, a surprising piece with more emotional depth than technical skill, all stormy skies and turbulent water. Sometimes the best art comes from the hardest days, she said, studying my face with the particular insight that seemed to come with age. Whatever's troubling you, dear, paint through it. That's what I've learned. Paint through everything. After class, I sat alone in the empty room, staring at my phone. I could call Vanessa. Demand an explanation. Fight for an invitation I clearly wasn't wanted at. Or I could do something I'd never done before in my 34 years of being the family's designated accommodator, the one who smoothed over conflicts and pretended everything was fine. I could choose myself. The idea felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of something vast with no map for what came next. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt strangely like relief. As if some part of me had been waiting for permission to stop trying to fit into spaces that had never been designed to include me. I opened my laptop and searched for flights, not to Charleston, but away from it. As far away as I could manage on my limited budget and teaching schedule. Somewhere I'd never been, somewhere no one knew the Hartley family name or cared about country club memberships and social standing. My cursor hovered over a deal for Iceland, a week-long trip departing the same weekend as Vanessa's wedding. Photography tours, hot springs, the northern lights if we were lucky. It would drain most of my carefully rebuilt savings, but something about it felt necessary, like choosing a direction after years of drifting. I booked it before I could talk myself out of it. Then I opened the family group chat and typed a single message. Congratulations, Vanessa. I hope your wedding is everything you've dreamed of. I'll be in Iceland that weekend, but I'm sure you weren't counting on me anyway. Wishing you both every happiness. I hit send and then, without waiting for responses, muted the entire conversation. Mrs. Patterson's words echoed in my mind. Paint through it. Maybe that's exactly what I needed to do, create something new from this ending, something that belonged entirely to me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The apartment felt different when I returned that evening, as if the walls themselves had shifted slightly while I was gone. I set my teaching bag by the door and stood in the small entryway, phone clutched in my hand, watching notification after notification light up the screen. 37 messages in the family chat. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I walked to my tiny kitchen, poured myself a glass of the cheap wine I kept for occasional indulgences, and sat at the second-hand table that had become my workspace, dining area, and creative studio all in one. The Iceland confirmation email glowed on my laptop screen, proof that I'd actually done it. Actually chosen something for myself instead of managing everyone else's comfort. My phone rang. Vanessa. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. My mother. Voicemail. Derek texted, Mom is losing it. Call her back. Please. The please struck me as almost funny. 27 years of accommodating my family's needs, and now my refusal to immediately smooth over their discomfort warranted a please. I was halfway through my wine when someone knocked on my apartment door. Sharp, insistent. I knew that knock, my mother's particular rhythm that managed to sound both entitled and impatient. For a long moment, I considered not answering. Then I remembered Mrs. Patterson's words about painting through difficulty, about facing things rather than avoiding them. I opened the door. My mother stood in the hallway wearing what I'd started thinking of as her intervention outfit, a cream cashmere sweater set and tailored slacks that announced she'd come directly from somewhere important to deal with something she considered beneath her usual concerns. Her expression was carefully arranged into what she probably thought was compassionate concern but read more like controlled irritation. Natalie. We need to talk. How did you get past the building security? I asked, not moving from the doorway. I told them I was your mother and there was a family emergency. Which there is, thanks to your little performance in the group chat. She glanced past me into my apartment, her nose wrinkling slightly at the sight of my modest space. Are you going to invite me in, or shall we have this conversation in the hallway where your neighbors can hear? I stepped aside, letting her enter. She'd only been to my apartment twice since I'd moved in 8 months ago, both times brief visits that involved her standing near the door as if proximity to my reduced circumstances might be contagious. Would you like something to drink? I offered, falling back into old patterns of hospitality even as part of me screamed to stop performing. No, thank you. She settled into my one decent armchair, the vintage piece I'd rescued from an estate sale and reupholstered myself. Natalie, what were you thinking with that message? Vanessa is devastated. The statement was so absurd that I actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised us both. Vanessa is devastated? She's the one getting married. To a man whose family owns half of Charleston. With a 200-person wedding that apparently doesn't include her own sister. It's not that simple and you know it. My mother's voice took on that particular edge, the one that used to make me immediately backtrack and apologize. Vanessa has been planning this wedding for 18 months. Every detail carefully considered. The guest list alone took weeks to finalize. There are social considerations, family dynamics, Bradford's business associates. You can't just expect to insert yourself into something so carefully orchestrated. Insert myself? I set my wine glass down carefully, afraid I might throw it otherwise. I'm her sister. I shouldn't need to insert myself. I should have been included from the beginning. And you would have been, if circumstances were different. My mother smoothed her perfectly styled hair, a nervous gesture she'd never admit to. But darling, you have to see how this looks. Your divorce was very public, very messy. Tyler's behavior reflected poorly on all of us. And your current situation, living here, teaching art classes to senior citizens, it's not exactly the image Vanessa wants to project at her wedding. The words landed like physical blows, each one precisely aimed at insecurities I'd been trying to heal. But underneath the hurt was something new, a clarity I'd never experienced before. So I'm an embarrassment, I said flatly. That's what you're saying. Don't put words in my mouth. I'm simply explaining reality. Vanessa has worked very hard to build the life she wants. Bradford's family is old money, real society. They have expectations. And having you there, explaining about the divorce, about your circumstances, it would create uncomfortable questions. About what? About the fact that I'm human? That I trusted the wrong person and am rebuilding my life? That I work an honest job teaching people something beautiful instead of whatever it is Vanessa does at that boutique PR firm that's really just Dad's friend's company? My mother stood abruptly. That's exactly the kind of bitterness I'm talking about. You've always been jealous of Vanessa, of her success, her relationships. This has nothing to do with the wedding and everything to do with your own insecurity. The accusation was so familiar, so perfectly calibrated to make me doubt myself, that I recognized it immediately for what it was, deflection. A way to make my legitimate hurt about my character flaws instead of their choices. I'm not jealous of Vanessa, I said quietly, surprised by how true it felt. I'm hurt that my own family would exclude me from a major life event and then act like I'm unreasonable for having feelings about it. Well, now you've made your feelings spectacularly clear. To everyone. Including Bradford's family, who are in that group chat because Vanessa wanted them to feel included in the planning. My mother collected her purse, signaling the conversation was ending on her terms. I hope you're satisfied with your dramatic exit. Iceland. Really, Natalie? Could you be more obvious? Obvious about what? About wanting attention. This whole thing, it's a cry for help. We all see it. Vanessa suggested we might need to have an intervention, actually. She's worried about your mental state. The manipulation was so textbook it would have been impressive if it weren't so painful. Turn my hurt into evidence of instability. Frame my boundary setting as a breakdown. Make my response to their cruelty the problem rather than the cruelty itself. You can leave now, I said, moving to open the door. Natalie, don't be childish. I drove all the way here to talk sense into you. I didn't ask you to come. I didn't ask for this conversation. You showed up uninvited to tell me that I'm not welcome at my sister's wedding because I'm an embarrassment to the family. Message received. Now please leave. My mother stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and what might have been respect. For 34 years, I'd never asked her to leave. Never ended a conversation on my terms. Never refused to keep talking until she was satisfied with the outcome. You're really going to Iceland? She asked finally, her voice different now, uncertain. Yes. During your sister's wedding. Yes. And you won't reconsider? Won't apologize to Vanessa and try to make this right? The question crystallized everything. Make this right meant make myself smaller, apologize for being hurt, pretend their exclusion was reasonable. It meant returning to the role I'd always played, the accommodating one, the understanding one, the one who absorbed everyone else's dysfunction so they could feel comfortable. No, I said simply. I won't. After she left, I sat in the silence of my apartment and waited for the guilt to come, the familiar gnawing feeling that I'd done something wrong, hurt someone, failed to be good enough. I'd felt it so many times before, after every family gathering where I hadn't been cheerful enough, every holiday where I'd failed to bring the right gift or say the right thing, every moment when I'd somehow disappointed them just by being myself. But the guilt didn't come. Instead, what I felt was something like peace, fragile and new, but undeniably present. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize at first, then realized was my cousin Heather, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Saw the group chat. Good for you. They've been awful to you for years and someone finally said it. Let me know if you need anything. Then another, from my former colleague at the marketing firm where I'd worked before the divorce, heard about the wedding drama through the grapevine. Want to grab coffee? I have some freelance opportunities you might be interested in. And then, most surprisingly, from Derek's wife Amanda, Derek is too scared of your mom to say this publicly, but I'm not. What they did was cruel. You deserve better. Also, I've always wanted to go to Iceland. Can I live vicariously through your photos? These small validations, from people on the periphery of my life who could see clearly what I'd been too close to recognize, felt like oxygen. Proof that my perception wasn't skewed, that the hurt was legitimate, that choosing myself wasn't selfish. I opened my laptop and began researching Iceland in earnest. Not just the tourist attractions, but photography workshops, art galleries, the creative community. What had started as an escape was beginning to feel like something else entirely, an opportunity to step into a version of myself that had been waiting, dormant, beneath years of family obligation and self-diminishment. By midnight, I'd mapped out an itinerary that had nothing to do with escaping my sister's wedding and everything to do with pursuing something I'd abandoned when I'd married Tyler and devoted myself to building the life my family approved of. I'd always wanted to photograph landscapes, to combine my artistic training with travel, to create something meaningful beyond corporate marketing materials and family obligation. Maybe this wasn't a breakdown. Maybe it was the beginning of something I should have started years ago. I fell asleep that night not in my bedroom, but on the couch with my laptop still open, dreaming of ice and fire and northern lights, of a place where no one knew my family name or cared about my reduced circumstances, where I could simply be Natalie, artist and traveler and woman who'd finally learned to choose herself first. The apartment felt different when I woke the next morning, lighter somehow, as if refusing my family's narrative had lifted a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. My phone showed 43 new messages in the family chat, still muted. I didn't open them. Instead, I made coffee, pulled out my old sketchbook, and began drawing what I imagined Iceland might look like, my hand moving across the paper with a freedom I hadn't felt in years. Whatever came next would be on my terms. And that, I was beginning to realize, was worth any amount of family disapproval. The morning after my mother's visit, I woke to find my phone had finally stopped buzzing. The silence felt ominous rather than peaceful, like the eye of a storm rather than its end. I made coffee and opened my laptop to finalize my Iceland arrangements, but found myself distracted by an email notification. My old friend from college, Jasmine Chin. No, I caught myself. I needed different names. My old friend from college, Ruby Blackwell. Another name to avoid. Let me restart with completely fresh names. My old friend from college, Paige Drummond, had sent a message with the subject line, "Saw your mom at the club yesterday." Paige and I had been roommates sophomore through senior year, bonding over late-night philosophy discussions and shared frustration with family expectations. She'd gone into nonprofit law while I'd pursued marketing, and we'd maintained sporadic contact over the years, mostly through occasional coffee meetups and holiday cards. Her email was brief. "Your mom was telling everyone at the tennis pavilion that you're having some kind of breakdown. Wanted you to know what narrative is being spread. Call me if you need to talk. Or better yet, let's meet for lunch." My treat. I stared at the message, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that came with knowing my family was controlling the story, shaping how others perceived me before I could speak for myself. It was a pattern I'd seen before, most dramatically during my divorce when my mother had managed to frame Tyler's financial betrayal as somehow resulting from my failure to keep him engaged in the marriage. But this time, instead of immediate panic about reputational damage, I felt something different. Curiosity about who else might see through the narrative. Who else might reach out not to judge, but to support. I replied to Paige, "Lunch sounds perfect. Tomorrow?" And for the record, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a breakthrough. There's a difference. By noon, 3 more messages had arrived. One from Amanda, Derek's wife, asking if I wanted company sorting through anything before my trip. One from my former supervisor at the marketing firm, Lydia Kemp, mentioning a contract position that had just opened up. And one from my downstairs neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Opal Reeves, saying she'd overheard raised voices last night and wanted to make sure I was all right. The emergence of a support network, people I'd barely maintained contact with during my marriage and its aftermath, felt simultaneously comforting and exposing. It revealed how isolated I'd become, how thoroughly I'd withdrawn from relationships outside my family's immediate circle. I texted Amanda first, "Would love the company. Also, I need to ask you something about the family dynamics. Things I might not be seeing clearly." Her response came within minutes, "Finally. I've been waiting years for you to ask. Come over tonight. Derek's working late." That evening, I drove to Amanda and Derek's house in the suburbs, a sprawling colonial that my mother always described as tasteful and appropriate for their station. Amanda answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, looking nothing like the polished wife she presented at family gatherings. "Thank God you're here," she said, pulling me inside. "I opened wine 30 minutes ago in anticipation. I have things to tell you and I needed liquid courage." We settled in her living room, a space that managed to be both elegant and comfortable, filled with photos of her and Derek's life together. I noticed, with a pang, that there were remarkably few photos including my parents or Vanessa. "Okay," Amanda said, pouring generous glasses of red wine. "How honest do you want me to be?" "Completely." She took a long sip, gathering her thoughts. "Your family has been setting you up as the scapegoat since before I married into this situation. I didn't recognize it at first because it's so subtle, but once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. What pattern? Everything that goes wrong gets redirected to somehow being your fault or your responsibility to fix. When Vanessa didn't get the promotion she wanted at that PR firm, your mother spent an entire Sunday dinner explaining how it was because Vanessa had been distracted helping you through your divorce. When your dad's investment didn't pay off the way he expected, there was somehow a connection to him having to bail you out, financially, even though you never asked for money and as far as I know, never received any. I sat very still, the wine untouched in my hand. I didn't know about the investment thing. Of course you didn't. Because that's how it works. They create these narratives in spaces you're not present for, so by the time you show up, everyone already has this shared understanding of you as the problem, the burden, the one who needs to be managed. Amanda leaned forward, her expression intense. Natalie, I've watched you apologize for things that weren't your fault for 7 years. I've watched you shrink yourself to accommodate everyone else's comfort. And I've watched your family take advantage of your accommodation while simultaneously resenting you for needing accommodation. That doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. It's a double bind. You're simultaneously too needy and too independent. Too sensitive and not sensitive enough to others' needs. Too ambitious when you were working in marketing, not ambitious enough now that you're teaching art. They've created a situation where you literally cannot win. The analysis was so precise, so clearly articulated, that something inside me cracked open. Not with pain this time, but with recognition. All the times I'd felt crazy for being hurt by something that was later explained as reasonable. All the times I'd questioned my own perceptions because everyone else seemed to have a different understanding of events. All the times I'd thought I was the problem. Why didn't you say anything before? I asked quietly. Amanda's expression turned sad. I tried, a few times. Do you remember that conversation we had about 3 years ago, after that horrible Easter brunch where your mother kept making comments about your weight? I did remember, vaguely. Amanda had said something about my mother being difficult and suggested I might want to create some boundaries. I defended my mother, explained that she was just worried about my health, that she meant well even if her delivery was harsh. You weren't ready to hear it, Amanda continued gently. And I get it. Recognizing that your family is dysfunctional, that they're actively harming you while claiming to love you, it's one of the hardest things a person can face. I couldn't force that realization. You had to come to it yourself. The wedding invitation. That's what did it. Sometimes it takes something undeniable. Something they can't reframe or explain away. Being excluded from your own sister's wedding because you're an embarrassment to the family image, that's pretty fucking undeniable. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Amanda added, almost casually, you should know that Derek wanted to say something to you. Multiple times. But your mother has this way of making him feel like protecting you means betraying her. It's exhausting to watch. He sent me a text yesterday. Said he thought it was messed up. That's more than he's ever done before. Usually he just stays silent and feels guilty about it later. Amanda refilled our wine glasses. For what it's worth, I think your Iceland trip is brilliant. You're physically removing yourself from their drama during a moment when they're trying to make you feel guilty for not participating. That takes real strength. My mother said it was a cry for attention. Of course she did. Because if your trip is a cry for attention, then she gets to be the victim responding to your unreasonable behavior. But if your trip is a healthy boundary, then she has to confront her own cruelty. Which narrative do you think she prefers? The question was rhetorical, but it illuminated something I'd been struggling to articulate. Every time I tried to set a boundary with my family, it had been reframed as an attack, a betrayal, evidence of my instability. The boundaries themselves were never addressed, only my supposedly inappropriate method of establishing them. Can I ask you something? I said. Did you know about the wedding invitation situation before yesterday? Amanda looked uncomfortable. Derek told me about 2 weeks ago. Vanessa had mentioned to your mother that she wasn't planning to invite you, and your mother thought it was a good idea because it would avoid awkwardness. Derek was upset about it but didn't know how to intervene without creating a huge family conflict. So everyone knew. 4 weeks. And no one said anything to me. I wanted to. I almost called you a dozen times. But Derek begged me not to, said it would make things worse, that maybe Vanessa would change her mind. And I convinced myself that it wasn't my place, that it was between you and your family. Amanda's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry. I should have told you. I should have prepared you instead of letting you find out through that group text. Her apology, genuine and without defensiveness, was more healing than I'd expected. Someone was taking accountability for their part in my hurt, however small, instead of explaining why their behavior had been reasonable. I forgive you, I said, and meant it. And I appreciate you telling me now. All of it. We talked for another 2 hours, Amanda filling in details about family dynamics I'd missed or misunderstood. The way Vanessa had always been positioned as the golden child whose needs came first. The way my parents' marriage was held together primarily by shared investment in maintaining appearances. The way Derek had learned to cope through emotional absence, being physically present but psychologically checked out during family conflicts. By the time I left, I had a clearer picture not just of my family's dysfunction, but of my own role in perpetuating it. I'd been so desperate to belong, to be valued, to be good enough, that I'd accepted treatment I would never have tolerated from friends or colleagues. I'd given my family a pass because they were family, as if biological connection exempted them from basic standards of respect and kindness. Driving home, I thought about the message I'd sent to the family group chat. I hope your wedding is everything you've dreamed of. I'd meant it sarcastically, a parting shot. But now I reconsidered. Maybe I did hope Vanessa's wedding was everything she dreamed of, not because she deserved it, but because my happiness wasn't dependent on her failure. Maybe the real freedom wasn't in her suffering consequences, but in me genuinely not caring whether she did or not. Back in my apartment, I found a package waiting outside my door. Inside was a travel journal, expensive leather-bound, with a note from Paige, for documenting your breakthrough. Can't wait to hear about Iceland. Lunch still on for tomorrow. P.S. Your mother's version of events isn't nearly as convincing as she thinks it is. Most people saw through it immediately. I opened the journal to the first blank page and wrote the date, then a single sentence, day 1 of choosing myself first. It felt simultaneously dramatic and exactly right. This wasn't just a trip to Iceland or a response to being excluded from a wedding. It was the beginning of a complete recalibration of how I moved through the world, who I prioritized, and what I was willing to accept in the name of family loyalty. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Vanessa. We need to talk. Call me. I looked at the message for a long moment, then set my phone down without responding. Whatever Vanessa needed to say could wait. Or not be said at all. For the first time in my life, her urgency was not my emergency. I spent the rest of the evening researching photography equipment rentals in Iceland, planning shots I wanted to capture, imagining a version of myself who created art for its own sake rather than for approval. A version who traveled not to escape, but to pursue. Who lived deliberately rather than reactively. The woman I was becoming didn't need an invitation to her sister's wedding. She was too busy building a life that actually belonged to her. The lunch with Paige the next day revealed layers of family manipulation I'd been blind to for years. We met at a small bistro downtown, the kind of place with mismatched vintage chairs and locally sourced everything that my mother would have dismissed as trying too hard. Paige arrived wearing her usual uniform of dark jeans and a blazer, her black hair cut in a sharp bob that framed her angular face. She'd always had this quality of complete self-possession that I'd envied in college, a woman who seemed utterly comfortable in her own skin. You look different, she said after we'd ordered. Not bad different. Like you'd been holding your breath for years and finally exhaled. That's surprisingly accurate. I stirred sugar into my coffee, organizing my thoughts. Can I ask you something about college? About how I was before I met Tyler? Please do. I've been waiting for this conversation since your wedding, honestly. Was I different? Before him, before all of this? Paige leaned back, considering. You were fierce, Natalie. You had this passion for art and social justice and calling out bullshit wherever you found it. Remember sophomore year when the university tried to cut funding for the arts program and you organized that protest? You had 300 students on the quad at 7 in the morning holding signs you'd designed yourself. I did remember, vaguely, like recalling a dream. That feels like a different person. It was a different person. Or rather, it was you before you started trying to be the person your family wanted. Before you started dating Tyler and decided that corporate success was more important than creative fulfillment. Before you traded your studio apartment full of your own paintings for a suburban house full of furniture your mother approved of. The assessment was harsh but fair. I'd made those choices consciously, telling myself I was growing up, being realistic, accepting that artistic dreams were for people with trust funds or lower standards of living. But underneath those rationalizations had been a deeper current. The desperate hope that if I just became successful enough, conventional enough, acceptable enough, my family would finally value me the way they valued Vanessa. Your mother was at the club yesterday, Paige continued, pulling out her phone. She was holding court at the tennis pavilion, telling a story about your episode. I recorded part of it because I thought you should hear exactly what's being said. She handed me her phone with earbuds. I hesitated, then listened. My mother's voice came through clearly, that particular tone she used when sharing confidential information that she actually wanted widely dispersed. We're all very worried about Natalie. The divorce hit her much harder than we realized. She's become quite withdrawn, stopped taking care of herself. And now this Iceland trip, completely impulsive, booked at the same weekend as Vanessa's wedding out of spite. Her therapist thinks it might be a manic episode. We're considering whether we need to take more direct action for her own safety. I pulled out the earbuds, my hands shaking. I don't have a therapist. I haven't seen one since right after the divorce. I know. I checked with your insurance company through my firm's database. No mental health claims in the past 8 months. Paige's expression was grim. She's creating a narrative of instability to explain your reasonable response to their cruelty. And she's doing it to your family's entire social circle. Why would she do that? Because if you're unstable, then your perspective can be dismissed. If you're having a breakdown, then excluding you from the wedding was actually merciful, protective. She's rewriting the story so she and Vanessa remain the victims of your behavior rather than the perpetrators of yours. I felt physically ill. This wasn't just family dysfunction or garden variety favoritism. This was calculated character assassination, the systematic destruction of my credibility within our community. There's more, Paige said quietly. I made some calls yesterday after your email. Talked to mutual acquaintances, people in your parents' social sphere. Your mother has been laying groundwork for this narrative for months. Ever since you moved into your apartment instead of returning to your parents' house after the divorce. She's been describing you as fragile, difficult, not herself. Setting up the interpretation that anything you do that doesn't align with their preferences is evidence of mental illness rather than healthy boundary setting. But why? What does she gain from people thinking I'm unstable? Control. And protection of the family image. If you're mentally unwell, then anything you might say about family dynamics can be dismissed as distorted perception. You can't credibly call out dysfunction if everyone already believes you're not perceiving reality clearly. The explanation made terrible sense. I thought about all the times I'd tried to address problematic family patterns only to be told I was too sensitive, or misremembering, or making things bigger than they were. The systematic erosion of my ability to trust my own perceptions. What should I do? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what I was facing. Document everything. Keep records of all communications. Make sure other people witness interactions when possible. And most importantly, don't engage with their narrative. You're not having a breakdown. You're having a breakthrough. Don't let them convince you otherwise. We talked through lunch and into the afternoon, Paige methodically helping me understand the difference between normal family conflict and the more insidious patterns I'd been experiencing. She introduced me to terms I'd never heard before: triangulation, gaslighting, scapegoating, flying monkeys. Flying monkeys? I repeated. People who do the narcissist's bidding, often without realizing they're being manipulated. They hear one side of the story, believe it, and then approach you on behalf of the narcissist to convince you that you're wrong, unreasonable, need to apologize, whatever. As if summoned by the explanation, my phone rang. My Aunt Prudence, my mother's older sister. That's probably a flying monkey right now, Paige observed. You want to practice boundary setting? I answered on speaker, with Paige's encouraging nod. Natalie, darling, I've been so worried about you. Aunt Prudence's voice dripped with concern. Your mother told me about this Iceland trip and I have to say, I think you're making a mistake. Missing your sister's wedding will damage your relationship with her permanently. Is that really what you want? Aunt Prudence, I appreciate your concern, but this is between Vanessa and me. But sweetheart, your mother is beside herself. She's afraid you're not thinking clearly. All this stress from the divorce, and now living alone in that tiny apartment, teaching those little classes instead of using your marketing degree. It's no wonder you're feeling overwhelmed and making impulsive decisions. The subtle denigration of my choices, wrapped in concern, was a perfect example of what Paige had been describing. Before, I would have defended myself, tried to explain my reasoning, sought her understanding. Now I saw it for what it was, an attempt to bring me back into compliance through manufactured worry. I'm not overwhelmed and I'm not making impulsive decisions. I'm making choices that prioritize my well-being over family convenience. If that's uncomfortable for others, that's not my responsibility to manage. Silence on the other end. Then, with an edge to her voice, well, I can see you've made up your mind to be difficult about this. I hope you don't regret it when you've alienated everyone who cares about you. She hung up before I could respond. Paige was grinning. That was perfect. Clear, firm, no justifying or defending. You're learning. But my hands were shaking. That was my aunt. She's been in my life since I was born. And I just essentially told her to back off. You set a boundary. That's different from telling her to back off. And yes, it feels terrible because you've been trained your whole life to prioritize other people's comfort over your own well-being. That training doesn't disappear overnight. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek, and Prudence just called Mom crying. Said you were hostile and aggressive with her. What's going on? I showed the message to Paige, who shook her head. See how fast that traveled? And notice how your reasonable boundary got translated into you being hostile and aggressive. This is the system protecting itself. I typed back, I wasn't aggressive. I was clear. There's a difference. If Aunt Prudence was upset by my boundary, that's her reaction to manage, not my behavior to change. Derek's response came quickly. Mom wants to have a family meeting. Tomorrow night. Everyone will be there. She thinks we need to address what's happening before it gets worse. Don't go, Paige advised immediately. That's not a meeting, it's an ambush. They want to gang up on you, overwhelm you with unified concern, pressure you into apologizing and complying. But if I don't go, they'll say I'm avoiding, refusing to communicate, proving I'm unstable. They'll say that anyway. They've already decided on the narrative. The only question is whether you're going to participate in a process designed to break down your boundaries, or whether you're going to maintain those boundaries even when it's uncomfortable. I stared at Derek's message, imagining tomorrow night. My parents, Vanessa, Derek, possibly Aunt Prudence and Uncle Gordon. All of them unified in their concern for me, their conviction that my behavior was the problem. The pressure to apologize, to explain, to justify, to submit to their collective judgment. A week ago, I would have gone. Would have tried to make them understand, to prove I was reasonable, to fix what they said was broken in me. Now, I typed, I'm not available for a meeting. If individual family members want to have respectful conversations with me, I'm open to that. But I'm not interested in group interventions. I hit send before I could reconsider. Now what? I asked Paige, feeling like I'd just jumped off a cliff. Now you prepare for escalation. They're going to try harder to bring you back into the fold. More phone calls, more concerned relatives, possibly even showing up at your apartment or workplace. You need to stay firm on your boundaries and not engage with their attempts to make you defend yourself. We spent the next hour strategizing, Paige using her legal training to help me think through scenarios and responses. By the time we left the restaurant, I had a clearer sense of what I was facing and how to handle it. But I also had something else, a witness. Someone who had heard my mother's false narrative firsthand, who understood the manipulation, who could validate my perception of reality when I inevitably started doubting it. That evening, I sat in my apartment and opened the leather journal Paige had given me. I wrote down everything I remembered about the past week, the group text, my mother's visit, Amanda's revelations, the recording of my mother at the club, and Prudence's call, Derek's message about the family meeting. Not to build a case or prove anything to anyone, but to have a record I could return to when the gaslighting intensified, when they tried to convince me that my memories were wrong, my perceptions distorted, my reactions inappropriate. I was building something I'd never had before, an independent record of truth that existed outside my family's narrative control. My phone rang again. Vanessa. I let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately. Then again. Then a text, "We need to talk now. You're destroying this family." I turned my phone to silent and returned to my journal, writing until my hand cramped, documenting not just events but feelings, observations, patterns I'd never allowed myself to fully acknowledge. Outside my window, the city lights glowed against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, my family was probably gathering, strategizing about how to handle my defection from the family system. Planning their next move in what they surely saw as a campaign to help me but what I now recognized as a campaign to control me. Let them plan. I had my own plans now, and they didn't require anyone's approval but my own. The morning of what would have been the family meeting, I woke to find 17 missed calls and 42 text messages. I didn't read them. Instead, I went for a run along the river path, something I'd started doing after the divorce as a way to clear my head and reclaim my body as my own after years of my mother's commentary about my weight. The April air was crisp, the water reflecting the early morning sun in fragments of light. Other runners passed me with brief nods, strangers engaged in their own journeys, indifferent to my family drama. There was something profoundly comforting about that anonymity, the reminder that my family's narrative about me only mattered within the small circle that believed it. When I returned to my apartment, sweaty and breathless but clear-headed, I found Amanda sitting in her car outside my building. "I couldn't do it," she said when I approached. "Couldn't go to that meeting and participate in them tearing you apart. Derek went. He'll probably be furious with me later, but I needed to warn you what they're planning." We went upstairs and I made coffee while Amanda gathered her thoughts, her usual composure fractured by whatever she'd learned. "Your mother has been in contact with Tyler," she said finally. The words didn't make sense at first. Tyler? My ex-husband Tyler? The one who stole from me and disappeared to Portland? Yes. She reached out to him 3 days ago. Asked him to provide a statement about your mental health during the marriage, your erratic behavior, your inability to maintain relationships. She's building a case for you being fundamentally unstable. I sat down heavily, coffee forgotten. Why would Tyler cooperate with that? He's the one who betrayed me. Because she offered him something. I don't know what exactly, but Derek overheard part of a phone conversation. Something about legal issues Tyler is facing in Oregon, and your father's connections with attorneys there who might be helpful. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. My mother was reaching out to my abusive ex-husband, offering to help him with his legal troubles in exchange for him providing false testimony about my character. It was so calculated, so deliberately cruel, that I felt momentarily dizzy. "There's more," Amanda continued, her voice dropping. "Vanessa has been documenting every interaction with you for months. Screenshots of texts, recordings of phone calls where you sound tired or frustrated. She's creating what she's calling an evidence file of your deterioration. Your mother plans to present it at the meeting tonight as proof that intervention is necessary. But I haven't been deteriorating. I've been healing. Getting stronger. I know that. Anyone actually paying attention knows that. But they're not interested in truth, Natalie. They're interested in control. And you choosing yourself, setting boundaries, refusing to accommodate their dysfunction, that threatens the entire family system. So they're doing what they always do when threatened, attacking the person who's exposing the dysfunction rather than addressing the dysfunction itself. I thought about the past week, about every small assertion of autonomy I'd made. Booking the Iceland trip. Refusing to apologize. Declining the family meeting. Each one had been met with escalating pressure to comply, to return to my designated role as the family's emotional regulator and scapegoat. What am I supposed to do? I asked, feeling the weight of what I was facing. This wasn't just about a wedding invitation anymore. It was about my fundamental right to exist outside their control. You fight back, Amanda said firmly. Not by engaging with their narrative, but by building your own. You have the job offer from Lydia, right? The contract position? I'd almost forgotten. Lydia Kemp, my former supervisor, had mentioned it at lunch yesterday. A 6-month contract doing marketing for a sustainable tourism company, fully remote, decent pay. I'd been so focused on the family drama I hadn't seriously considered it. Take it, Amanda urged. Show that you're professionally capable, financially independent. Start documenting your own life, your own narrative. Not to prove anything to them, but to have a record that exists outside their interpretation. Paige said something similar. About documentation. Paige is smart. And she's right. The more you build a life that's visible and verifiable outside your family's sphere of influence, the harder it becomes for them to control the story about who you are. We talked through the morning, Amanda sharing details she'd gathered about the family's strategy. Uncle Gordon was apparently prepared to offer financial assistance if I agreed to get help, which really meant agreeing to see a therapist they'd selected who would presumably validate their concerns. Aunt Prudence had been tasked with reaching out to my friends and former colleagues to express concern about my welfare, seeding doubt about my stability. It was a coordinated campaign, and its sophistication suggested this wasn't the first time they'd done something like this. I wondered, with a chill, if they'd done something similar to my father's sister, Aunt Caroline, who'd moved to Seattle years ago and with whom the family had minimal contact. Had she also been designated unstable when she'd refused to play her assigned role? I need to call Lydia, I said, making a decision. Accept that contract position. And I need to move up my Iceland trip if possible. Why move it up? Because if I'm here for their meeting, they'll find a way to force a confrontation. Show up at my apartment, my workplace, somewhere I can't avoid them. But if I'm literally in another country, they lose that leverage. Amanda nodded slowly. That's actually brilliant. Hard to stage an intervention on someone who's on a different continent. I pulled out my laptop and started researching flight changes. The original trip was scheduled for 2 weeks from now, during Vanessa's wedding weekend. But there were flights leaving in 3 days, and the photography workshop I'd registered for had another session starting that weekend. It would cost extra to change everything. Money I'd been carefully saving. But as I calculated the expense against the cost of remaining accessible to my family's manipulation, it seemed like the best investment I could make. I booked the earlier flight, feeling a rush of something like exhilaration. I was doing it. Actually choosing myself, my sanity, my freedom over their expectations and demands. What about your teaching job? Amanda asked. Can you take that much time off? It's a community center program, not a full-time position. I'll talk to the director, see if we can arrange for a substitute. And I'll have the remote marketing work to do while I'm there, so I'm not just running away. I'm relocating temporarily while I figure things out. The reframing mattered. Not escape, but strategic repositioning. Not breakdown, but breakthrough. After Amanda left, I spent the afternoon handling logistics. I called Lydia and accepted the contract position, starting immediately. I contacted the community center director, who was surprisingly supportive and offered to find coverage for my classes. I emailed the Iceland photography workshop coordinator, explaining the change in my travel dates. Each task completed felt like laying bricks in a foundation that belonged entirely to me. A life I was building not in reaction to my family's rejection, but in pursuit of what I actually wanted. Around 4 p.m, my mother called. I let it ring through to voicemail, then listened to the message on speaker. "Natalie, this is ridiculous. We're all here waiting for you. Your whole family, everyone who loves you, and you can't even be bothered to show up and have a conversation. This behavior, this selfishness, it's exactly what we're concerned about. If you don't come tonight, we'll have no choice but to take more serious action. We can't just stand by while you self-destruct." The message was perfectly calibrated to trigger guilt, fear, and self-doubt. The implication that not attending their ambush meeting constituted self-destruction was almost impressive in its audacity. I deleted the message and called Paige instead. "They're meeting right now," I told her. "All of them, discussing me like I'm a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected." "Good. Let them meet. Let them realize that their power over you only exists if you grant it to them." I could hear the smile in her voice. "So, what are you doing instead of attending their intervention?" "Packing for Iceland. I moved the trip up. I leave in 3 days." "Natalie, that's perfect. Absolutely perfect." We talked for a while longer, Paige coaching me through what to expect when my family realized I'd left the country. The escalation of concern, the possible involvement of authorities if they filed a missing person report out of worry, the importance of making sure multiple people knew my plans and could verify I was traveling voluntarily. By the time we hung up, I had a safety plan in place. Paige would have my full itinerary. Amanda would have copies of my travel documents and accommodation confirmations. I'd send regular updates to both of them, creating a trail of evidence that I was fine, functioning, choosing this path deliberately. That night, I should have felt anxious about the confrontation to come, about my family's escalating attempts to control me. Instead, I felt something unexpected: peace. The kind that comes from finally aligning your actions with your values, from choosing integrity over belonging. I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat, still muted since that first day. 47 new messages, none of which I'd read. I scrolled past them all and typed a new message. "I won't be attending tonight's meeting or any future meetings framed as interventions. I'm not self-destructing. I'm self-constructing, possibly for the first time in my adult life. I'm building a life that honors who I actually am rather than who you need me to be. I understand this is uncomfortable for the family system, but your comfort is no longer my responsibility. I'll be traveling for the next few weeks. I'll contact people individually if and when I'm ready. Please respect this boundary." I hit send before I could reconsider, then immediately muted the chat again. Within seconds, my phone started ringing. My mother. Then Vanessa. Then Derek. I turned my phone off completely and sat in the silence of my apartment, surrounded by half-packed bags and the tangible evidence of a life I was claiming for myself. On my laptop, the Iceland itinerary glowed: Reykjavik, the Golden Circle, the black sand beaches of Vik, the glacial lagoons. Places I'd dreamed of seeing but had always found reasons not to go. Too expensive. Too far. Too frivolous for someone who should be focused on building a stable, respectable life. But stability built on self-erasure wasn't stable at all. It was a trap disguised as security, a cage painted to look like a home. I returned to packing, carefully folding thermal layers and waterproof gear, my camera equipment and the new journal Paige had given me. Each item I placed in my suitcase felt symbolic, a piece of armor for the journey ahead. Tomorrow I would finalize my departure preparations. Notify my landlord I'd be gone for several weeks. Set up automatic bill payments. Arrange for my neighbor Mrs. Reeves to collect any mail. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply exist in this liminal space between the life I'd been living and the life I was about to step into. To feel both the grief of losing my family of origin and the excitement of discovering who I might become without their constant shaping and criticism. The last thing I packed was a small watercolor set, the one I'd used in college before I'd convinced myself that art was an impractical dream. I wasn't sure if I'd use it in Iceland, but having it with me felt important. A promise to the part of myself that had been waiting patiently for permission to exist fully, creatively, without apology. Permission I was finally granting myself. The day before my flight, I went to say goodbye to my students at the community center. Word had spread about my Iceland trip, though I'd been careful not to mention the family drama that precipitated it. As far as my seniors knew, this was a long-planned creative retreat, an opportunity to focus on my photography and painting. Mrs. Patterson cornered me after class, her weathered hands clasping mine with surprising strength. "Running towards something or away from something?" she asked, her faded blue eyes sharp with understanding. "Both, I think," I admitted, surprised by the honesty that came easier with strangers than with family. "Good answer. The best journeys usually are." She released my hands and pulled a small package from her bag. "Open it when you get there." "Not before." I hugged her, this woman I'd known for less than a year but who somehow saw me more clearly than people who'd known me my entire life. Teaching these classes had been framed by my family as evidence of my diminished circumstances, but standing in that community center room, surrounded by people who painted for joy rather than profit, who created art simply because it fed something essential in them, I realized this had been one of the most authentic choices I'd made in years. My phone, which I'd been keeping on airplane mode except for checking specific messages from Paige and Amanda, showed 37 missed calls when I briefly turned it on to confirm my flight details. I didn't listen to any of the voicemails. Whatever my family needed to say, they could say to my absence. That evening, as I did my final packing check, someone knocked on my apartment door. Heavy, insistent. Male. I looked through the peephole and saw my father. I hadn't seen him since Christmas, hadn't spoken to him since the group text about Vanessa's wedding. He stood in the hallway looking older than I remembered, his silver hair carefully combed, wearing the cardigan I'd given him for his birthday 3 years ago. The sight of that sweater, evidence that he'd kept my gift, wore it, created an unexpected stab of pain. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Natalie." His voice was gruff with emotion. "Your mother is beside herself. We need to talk about this situation before you leave the country." "There's nothing to talk about, Dad. I'm taking a trip." Adults do that. Not when they're in crisis. Not when their whole family is worried sick about them. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from my childhood, usually preceding lectures about responsibility and family obligation. "Your mother told me about the message you sent. About building a life that honors who you actually are." "What does that even mean?" "It means I'm tired of trying to be the daughter you all seem to want instead of the person I actually am." "That's nonsense. We love you exactly as you are." The automatic denial, the refusal to even consider that their love might be conditional, was so characteristic that I almost laughed. "Dad, I wasn't invited to Vanessa's wedding because I'm an embarrassment to the family. Mom said it herself. My divorce, my apartment, my teaching job, none of it meets your standards. So no, you don't love me exactly as I am. You love the version of me that doesn't exist anymore, if she ever did." His expression shifted, something that might have been guilt flickering across his features before being replaced by defensiveness. "That was a misunderstanding. Vanessa was trying to keep the wedding small and intimate. It wasn't personal. It was entirely personal. And even if it wasn't, Mom's been telling people I'm mentally unstable. She contacted Tyler to get him to testify about my supposed erratic behavior. She's trying to build a case that I need intervention, all because I refused to pretend being excluded didn't hurt." My father's face went pale. "That's not, she wouldn't." "She did." Amanda heard the phone call with Tyler. Mom offered to help him with his legal troubles in exchange for a statement about my mental health during our marriage. So let's not pretend this is about family love or concern. This is about control. He was quiet for a long moment, and I watched emotions play across his face. Doubt, anger, something that looked like recognition. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter. "Your mother has always been very protective of the family image. Sometimes she takes things too far." The admission was small but significant. An acknowledgement, however limited, that my perception wasn't completely distorted. "Dad, I need you to understand something." I'm not doing this to hurt anyone or to punish Vanessa for her wedding. I'm doing this because I've spent 34 years trying to be good enough for this family, and I've finally realized that the target keeps moving. There is no version of me that will be acceptable unless it's the version you all design. And I can't live like that anymore. So what, you're just leaving? Cutting us all off? I'm taking space. There's a difference. I'm going to Iceland for 3 weeks. I'm going to work on my photography and painting. I'm going to remember who I was before I started measuring my worth by your approval. And then I'll come back and figure out what healthy relationships with my family might look like, if that's even possible. My father looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You sound different. Harder. Not harder. Clearer. I know what I will and won't accept now. And I won't accept being treated as disposable when I don't fit the family script. He reached out as if to touch my shoulder, then stopped, hand hovering in the air between us. Your mother is planning to file a missing persons report if you don't contact her from Iceland regularly. The threat was delivered almost apologetically, but it was a threat nonetheless. My autonomy, my right to take a trip without constant check-ins, was being framed as grounds for police intervention. I've given my itinerary to 2 friends who can verify I'm traveling voluntarily. I'll send regular updates to them. But I won't be checking in with Mom like some kind of parolee. I'm a grown woman taking a vacation, not a flight risk. She's your mother, Natalie. She loves you. Then she has a strange way of showing it. Love doesn't involve character assassination and manipulation. Love doesn't require me to abandon my own perceptions of reality to accommodate hers. My father flinched at that, and I wondered if somewhere deep down, he recognized the pattern I was describing. If maybe he'd been accommodating my mother's version of reality for so long that he'd forgotten what it was like to trust his own perceptions. I need to finish packing, I said, not unkindly. My flight is early tomorrow morning. Natalie, please. Don't do this. Come to the house, talk to your mother, work this out like adults. You're throwing away your whole family over a wedding invitation. No, Dad. The family threw me away. I'm just accepting that reality instead of pretending it didn't happen. There's a difference. He stood there for another moment, looking lost in a way I'd never seen before. My father, always so certain, so commanding, reduced to uncertainty in the face of a daughter who refused to be managed. Will you at least call me from Iceland? Let me know you're safe. The request, smaller and more genuine than my mother's demands for regular check-ins, touched something in me. Whatever my father's complicity in the family dysfunction, I didn't think he was actively malicious, just deeply conflict avoidant and conditioned to defer to my mother's interpretation of events. I'll send you postcards, I offered. Old-fashioned, written by hand. You'll get them after I'm back, but you'll know I was thinking of you. Something in his expression softened. Your grandmother used to send me postcards. From all her travels after your grandfather died. I kept every one. I hadn't known that. Hadn't known my grandmother traveled, hadn't known my father valued those small, tangible connections. It was a glimpse of a person beyond the role he played in our family dynamic, and it reminded me that everyone in this system was shaped by it, trapped by it in different ways. I'll be okay, Dad. Actually, I think I'll be better than okay. But I need to do this my way, without the family weight on every decision. He nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. He stepped forward and hugged me, briefly but genuinely. You were always the stubborn one, he murmured against my hair. Like your grandmother. She left too, you know. For a while. When things got too complicated. She came back different. Stronger. He released me and turned to leave, then paused at the door. Your mother won't understand this. But maybe I do. A little. After he left, I stood in my apartment feeling the echo of that hug, the unexpected revelation about my grandmother. I'd never been told she left. Never knew there was a precedent in my family for a woman choosing herself over family expectations, even temporarily. I found my laptop and searched for information about my grandmother, Lillian Hartley. She died when I was 8, before I was old enough to know her as anything other than the gentle old woman who gave me butterscotch candies and let me play in her garden. There wasn't much online, but I found an old newspaper article from 1967. Local woman returns from year abroad, opens art gallery. The accompanying photo showed a woman in her 40s, stylish and confident, standing in front of a small gallery space. The article mentioned she'd spent a year traveling through Europe, studying art, finding herself after years devoted to family. My grandmother had been an artist. Had left for a year. Had returned and opened a gallery. And somehow this entire history had been erased from family narrative, reduced to nothing more than my vague memory of an old woman who liked flowers and butterscotch. I wondered what happened to the gallery, why she'd stopped, why no one ever talked about this part of her life. But I could guess. The same forces that were trying to contain me now had probably contained her then. The same family pressure to conform, to be appropriate, to prioritize image over authenticity. But she'd had that year. That stolen time to remember who she was beyond her roles. And she'd come back stronger, according to my father. I printed the newspaper article and tucked it into my journal, a talisman for the journey ahead. Proof that resistance had a history in my family, even if that history had been deliberately forgotten. That night I dreamed of Iceland, of vast landscapes and northern lights, of my grandmother standing on a black sand beach, younger than I'd ever seen her, painting watercolors of ice and fire. In the dream, she turned to me and smiled, and I understood that she was giving me permission, passing something forward that had been interrupted but not destroyed. I woke at 4 a.m, hours before my alarm. My bags were packed, my apartment secured, my path clear. In a few hours, I would board a plane to a place where no one knew the Hartley family name, where I could simply be Natalie, artist and traveler and woman learning to trust her own perceptions. My phone sat silent on the nightstand, turned off completely. Whatever crisis my family was manufacturing could exist without my participation. I was choosing a different story now, one where my absence was not abandonment but necessary space, where my healing was not selfishness but survival. The sky outside my window was still dark, stars visible above the city lights. I made coffee and sat at my small table, watching dawn approach, feeling ready for whatever came next. Not because I had all the answers. Not because I wasn't afraid. But because for the first time in my adult life, I was choosing my own path without apologizing for the choice. And that, I was learning, was enough. The Keflavik airport was smaller than I expected, modern and efficient with floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the stark Icelandic landscape beyond. I'd slept fitfully on the red-eye flight, my mind too active to fully rest, processing the past week's upheaval and anticipating what lay ahead. Going through customs, I felt a strange lightness, as if crossing this international border had severed some invisible tether that had been constraining me. The customs agent stamped my passport with barely a glance, and I was through, officially in a country where my family's influence and narratives held no power. I'd arranged a rental car, something I'd been nervous about given Iceland's reputation for challenging driving conditions. But the woman at the rental counter was patient, explaining the roads, the weather alerts I should monitor, the peculiarities of driving in a country where sheep sometimes wandered onto highways. First time in Iceland, she asked, her English accented but fluent. First time doing anything completely on my own terms, I replied, surprising myself with the honesty. She smiled, understanding something in my tone. Iceland is good for that. The landscape doesn't care about your expectations. It just is. Very freeing, actually. The drive from the airport toward Reykjavik took me through volcanic fields, lunar-like terrain that looked like the surface of another planet. Black rock and moss stretched in all directions, punctuated occasionally by steam rising from geothermal vents. Everything felt raw, unfinished, as if the earth was still deciding what it wanted to become. I'd booked a small guest house in Reykjavik, run by a woman named Sigrid who greeted me with tea and homemade cleaner, Icelandic twisted donuts. She was probably in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of weathered beauty that comes from living in harsh climates. "You're here for the photography workshop?" she asked as I settled into the cozy common room. "And to clear my head. Maybe figure some things out." "Good place for that. Iceland demands honesty." Can't pretend here, not with the weather, not with yourself. The landscape strips away everything unnecessary. She poured more tea, studying me with frank curiosity. Running from something or toward something? The same question Mrs. Patterson had asked. Both. And trying to figure out if there's a difference. Sigrid nodded approvingly. Smart. Most people who come here are doing the same, whether they admit it or not. The tourists want to see waterfalls and take photos. The real travelers, they're looking for something they can't name yet. After settling into my room, small but perfectly appointed with a view of the harbor, I turned on my phone for the first time since leaving Boston. 83 messages. 21 voicemails. Multiple missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I sent brief texts to Paige and Amanda, arrived safely. Iceland is otherworldly. We'll update in a few days. Then I turned the phone back off and tucked it into my suitcase. The photography workshop started the next morning, meeting at a coffee shop in downtown Reykjavik. There were 12 of us, ranging from a retired engineer from Munich to a college student from Tokyo. Our instructor, John, was Icelandic, probably in his 40s, with the kind of calm competence that immediately put everyone at ease. Photography is about seeing, he began, not with technical specifications or equipment discussions, but with philosophy. Not looking, but seeing. Most people look at Iceland and see postcard images. Waterfalls, glaciers, northern lights. Beautiful but surface. Real photography sees what's underneath. The story the landscape is telling. We spent the day wandering Reykjavik, not shooting the obvious landmarks but finding details. Weathered wood on old fishing boats. Patterns in volcanic rock used for building materials. The way light reflected off the harbor at different times of day. John pushed us to see beyond the pretty, to find the truth of a place. That shot, he said, looking at my photo of a rusted anchor chain against colorful houses, you're starting to see. The contrast between decay and vibrancy, between what's been discarded and what's maintained. Keep going deeper. That evening, I sat in a small restaurant overlooking the water, eating fresh fish and watching the sun take hours to set, the sky cycling through impossible colors. I pulled out the journal Paige had given me and wrote, not about my family or the wedding drama, but about what I was seeing, feeling, discovering. Iceland doesn't apologize for being harsh. The wind doesn't care if you're cold. The rain doesn't check if you're prepared. There's something profoundly honest about a place that just is what it is, without performing or accommodating. I want to be more like that. Not cruel, but honest. Not harsh, but unapologetic about my reality. Over the next few days, the workshop took us beyond Reykjavik. The Golden Circle route, Thingvellir National Park, where tectonic plates pulled apart creating a visible rift between continents, Geyser with its explosive hot springs, Gullfoss waterfall thundering with glacial meltwater. John taught us to wait, to be patient with light and weather, to understand that the best shots came not from forcing moments but from being present when they arrived naturally. The parallel to my life wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years forcing myself to fit, to perform, to be what was needed. Maybe there was another way, one that involved simply being present and authentic, letting the right moments arise instead of manufacturing them. On the fourth day, we drove to Vik, a small coastal town with black sand beaches. The contrast was stunning, obsidian sand against white surf, towering basalt columns called Reynisdrangar rising from the sea like the fingers of buried giants. I wandered away from the group, drawn to the far end of the beach where fewer tourists ventured. The wind was fierce, the spray from the waves soaking me despite my waterproof gear. I set up my camera and started shooting, not worrying about perfect composition, just responding to what I felt. A woman's voice startled me. Beautiful, isn't it? Violent and beautiful at the same time. I turned to find another workshop participant, a woman probably in her 50s from Toronto named Claire. We'd spoken briefly but hadn't connected much beyond pleasantries. It feels honest, I replied. No pretense of being gentle or welcoming. Just completely itself. I came here after my daughter died, Claire said abruptly, her eyes on the horizon. 6 months ago. Aneurysm. She was 28. Everyone kept telling me how to grieve, what timeline I should follow, when I should be getting back to normal. I needed a place that wouldn't have expectations about how I should feel. The confession hung between us, intimate and unexpected. I'm sorry about your daughter. Thank you. What brought you here? I considered deflecting, giving the safe answer about vacation and photography. But something about this place, this woman, this moment of raw honesty demanded truth. My family excluded me from my sister's wedding because I'm an embarrassment after my divorce. When I didn't apologize for being hurt about it, they decided I was mentally unstable and needed intervention. So I came here instead, where no one can tell me their version of my reality is more accurate than my own experience of it. Claire looked at me with understanding. Family can be the most damaging sometimes, precisely because we keep thinking they should be different. That blood should mean something more than it does. Does it get easier? Learning to accept that they're just not capable of what you need? I don't know yet. I'm still figuring it out. But I know I'm tired of contorting myself to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold all of me. She gestured toward the violent beauty of the beach. Maybe that's what we're both doing here. Learning to take up the space we actually need instead of the space we've been allotted. We stood together in companionable silence, two women on a black sand beach in Iceland, both running from and toward something, both learning that sometimes the only way forward is through complete honesty about what is, not what should be. That night, back at the guest house, I finally opened my phone to check messages. Among the continued family communications I didn't read, there was one from an unknown number with a Boston area code. Natalie, this is Bradford Cunningham, Vanessa's fiancé. I don't know you well, but I wanted to reach out. I've been hearing a lot about you from her family, and some things aren't adding up. If you're willing, I'd like to hear your side of things. No judgment, just curiosity about someone who seems to be systematically misrepresented. My private email is below if you prefer that route. The message was so unexpected, so contrary to everything I'd anticipated, that I read it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. Bradford, the man marrying my sister, the person whose family's approval had supposedly necessitated my exclusion, was questioning the narrative about me. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat with the message, considering what it meant. Someone inside the wedding circle was seeing through the story, noticing inconsistencies, curious enough to reach out directly rather than accepting the carefully constructed version of events. It was the first crack in what had seemed like a unified front. And it suggested that maybe, just maybe, the truth had a way of emerging even when people worked hard to bury it. I opened my laptop and started drafting a response, not defensive or angry, just honest. I explained the invitation situation simply, included screenshots of the relevant family chat messages, attached Amanda's statement about my mother's contact with Tyler. Not to convince Bradford of anything, but to provide him with information he could verify independently. I don't expect this to change anything about the wedding, I wrote in conclusion. Vanessa has every right to invite or exclude whoever she wants. But you asked for my side, and this is it. Whatever you choose to do with this information is entirely up to you. I'm in Iceland for the next few weeks, getting clear on who I am outside of family narratives. I hope your wedding is exactly what you both want it to be. I hit send before I could overthink it, then turned my phone off again. The next morning brought one of John's spontaneous adventures. The weather forecast showed unusual aurora activity, and he was taking anyone interested on a midnight photography expedition to a location outside light pollution zones. 8 of us piled into vans and drove through darkness to a remote field, the kind of absolute dark that doesn't exist near cities. We set up our cameras and waited, and then, as if on cue, the sky began to move. I'd seen photos of northern lights, knew intellectually what to expect. But nothing prepared me for the reality of it. Curtains of green and purple light rippling across the sky, dancing and shifting, utterly silent despite their apparent motion. It felt like watching something sacred, a natural phenomenon that existed whether humans witnessed it or not, performing for itself rather than for an audience. John moved among us, helping with camera settings but mostly just letting us experience it. "Don't just photograph," he murmured. "See it first. feel it. The photos are just evidence of what you witnessed. I stood there, camera temporarily forgotten, watching light paint the sky. Claire stood beside me, and I heard her breath catch, something between a sob and a laugh. She would have loved this, Claire whispered. My daughter. She always wanted to see the northern lights. I reached over and took her hand, saying nothing, just being present with her grief and wonder existing simultaneously. We stayed for hours, until the aurora faded and the sky began to lighten with approaching dawn. Cold and exhausted and somehow filled up, we drove back to Reykjavik in silence, everyone processing what they'd witnessed. Back in my room, finally allowing myself to sleep, I felt something fundamental had shifted. Not fixed, not resolved, but shifted. The realization that beauty and pain could coexist, that you could grieve what you'd lost while still being open to wonder, that leaving didn't have to mean giving up hope, just giving up the futile attempt to force something impossible. My family might never understand why I left. Might never accept that their treatment of me was harmful rather than helpful. But increasingly, I was realizing that their understanding wasn't necessary for my healing. Their acceptance wasn't required for my wholeness. I could be sad about that and simultaneously be filled with aurora-light wonder. Could mourn the family I wished I had while building a life that honored the person I actually was. Both could be true at once, like Iceland itself, harsh and welcoming, violent and beautiful, ancient and constantly being born. The second week in Iceland brought unexpected developments. I'd settled into a rhythm, mornings spent in photography workshops or solo expeditions, afternoons working remotely on the sustainable tourism marketing contract, evenings journaling or exploring Reykjavik's small but vibrant art scene. The work for Lydia's company was surprisingly fulfilling, crafting narratives about responsible travel that aligned with what I was experiencing firsthand. Iceland's tourism industry walked a delicate balance between welcoming visitors and protecting fragile ecosystems, a metaphor I found myself returning to constantly. How do you remain open while maintaining necessary boundaries? How do you share yourself without being consumed? I'd been in Iceland for 10 days when Bradford emailed back. His response was thoughtful, measured, and completely unexpected. Thank you for your honesty and for providing documentation. I've spent the past few days quietly verifying what I could, and you're right, the inconsistencies are significant. I spoke with Amanda separately, and her account matches yours exactly. I also discovered that your mother has been, let's say, selectively editing family history in conversations with my parents. Things she told them about your divorce, about your relationship with Vanessa growing up, none of it aligns with what I'm finding when I ask other sources. He continued, I want to be clear that I'm not taking sides in family dynamics I don't fully understand. But I am concerned about marrying into a family system that operates through narrative control rather than honest communication. Vanessa and I need to have some serious conversations before the wedding. She's not happy that I've been asking questions. Says I'm being influenced by your manipulation. But from where I'm standing, asking for verification of claims isn't being manipulated, it's being responsible. The email concluded, I don't know what will happen with the wedding. Vanessa is angry that I contacted you, angrier still that I'm not simply accepting her family's version of events. But I can't enter a marriage with this many unanswered questions about basic honesty. You deserve to know that at least one person is seeing through what's being constructed. Stay in Iceland as long as you need. You're exactly where you should be. I read the email 3 times, trying to process its implications. Bradford questioning the wedding. Vanessa angry at being questioned. The carefully constructed narrative beginning to crumble under scrutiny. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to celebrate this crack in the family's united front. But mostly I felt sad. Sad that it had come to this, that truth was so threatening to my family that they'd rather construct elaborate lies than simply admit fault or apologize. I forwarded the email to Paige with a brief note, things are getting complicated back home. Thoughts? Her response came within an hour, this is actually good news, even if it doesn't feel like it. Truth has a way of emerging, and Bradford seems like someone with integrity who won't be easily manipulated. Whatever happens with the wedding is between him and Vanessa. Your job is to stay focused on your own healing. How's Iceland treating you? I smiled at her redirection, her refusal to let me get pulled back into family drama even from 4,000 miles away. Iceland is teaching me that beautiful things can exist in harsh conditions. That you can be both soft and strong. That sometimes the most honest thing you can do is simply stop performing. The photography workshop concluded that week with a final assignment: create a series that told a personal truth. Not pretty landscapes or technical perfection, but something that revealed who we were and what we were learning. I spent 3 days on my series, photographing contrasts. Ice and fire. Light and volcanic darkness. Delicate wildflowers growing in lava fields. Weathered fishing boats still functional despite decades of harsh conditions. Each image was about survival, about existing authentically in environments that demanded constant adaptation without losing essential character. John studied my work during our final critique session, taking his time with each image. "This is what I was hoping you'd find," he said finally. "Not just seeing Iceland, but seeing yourself through Iceland. These aren't landscape photos. They're portraits of resilience." Claire, who'd become a genuine friend over the past 2 weeks, added her perspective. "You've been photographing what you're becoming. Look at this one." She pointed to my favorite image, a small Arctic flower pushing through volcanic rock, backlit by golden hour light. "That's you. Finding ways to bloom in impossible conditions." The workshop ended with a small exhibition at a local gallery, our work displayed for one evening alongside Icelandic artists. It was modest, nothing grand, but standing in that space watching strangers engage with my photographs felt significant. Evidence that I could create something meaningful, that my perspective had value even when my family dismissed it. Sigrid came to the exhibition, bringing several of her friends. "I knew you were here for more than waterfalls," she said, studying my series. "You're finding your way back to yourself. I can see it in these images, in how you carry yourself now compared to when you arrived. Is it that obvious? To anyone who's paying attention. You arrived apologizing for taking up space. Now you inhabit your space without apology. That's the Iceland effect. The landscape doesn't care about your doubts, so eventually you stop caring about them too." That night, after the exhibition, a group from the workshop gathered at a small bar overlooking the harbor. Claire, John, the engineering student from Munich named Thomas, the college student from Tokyo named Yuki. We'd become an unlikely community, bound by our shared experience of looking at Iceland and seeing different versions of ourselves reflected back. "What happens when you go home?" Yuki asked me, her English careful but fluent. "Will you return to your family?" "I don't know yet. I think I'll try to build something new with the people who can meet me honestly. My brother's wife, a few friends who've proven they can see past the family narrative. But the relationship with my parents and sister, that might be permanently changed. And I'm learning to be okay with that." "It's brave," Thomas observed. "Most people choose familiar dysfunction over unknown possibility. You're choosing the unknown. Or maybe I just finally got tired of performing. Iceland doesn't perform. It just is. I want to live more like that." John raised his glass. "To living like Iceland. Honest, occasionally harsh, but undeniably real." We toasted, and I felt something settle in my chest. Acceptance, maybe. Not of my family's treatment, but of reality as it actually was rather than as I wished it to be. My family might never acknowledge their patterns, never apologize, never change. And I could still build a meaningful life, could still have authentic connections, could still create and grow and become. The next morning, I finally called Paige on video chat, wanting to see her face as we talked through everything that had been unfolding. "You look different," she said immediately, echoing what others had observed. "Lighter somehow. I feel different. I think I've been carrying this weight of family expectation for so long I forgot it wasn't part of me. Setting it down, even temporarily, I'm discovering who I am without it." "That's the work," Paige affirmed. "Separating who you actually are from who you've been trained to be. Most people never do that work. They just keep performing their assigned roles until they die, wondering why they're so unhappy." We talked for over an hour, Paige filling me in on developments back in Boston. My mother had indeed filed a missing persons report, which was quickly dismissed when Paige provided my travel itinerary and proof of regular communication. Vanessa's wedding was in chaos, with Bradford insisting on postponing until they could work through some fundamental issues about honesty and family dynamics. My father had apparently gone silent, not engaging in my mother's increasingly frantic attempts to locate and control me. Derek reached out to me, Paige added. Asked if I could convince you to come home early, said the family was falling apart without you there to mediate. I told him that was exactly the problem, that you'd been functioning as emotional glue holding together something that should have fallen apart years ago. How did he take that? Not well. But Amanda backed me up. She's been surprisingly fierce about protecting your boundaries. I think watching you choose yourself has inspired her to examine her own accommodation of family dysfunction. After we disconnected, I walked down to the harbor, watching fishing boats prepare for their day. The sky was doing that thing it did in Iceland, cycling through multiple weather patterns in rapid succession. Sun, then clouds, then rain, then sun again. Everything exposed, nothing hidden or performed. My phone buzzed with a text from Bradford, wedding postponed indefinitely. Vanessa is furious. Your mother is threatening legal action against me for alienation of affection, which is apparently not actually a thing in Massachusetts. Your father called and apologized, said he's starting to see patterns he'd been avoiding for years. Thought you should know the ripple effects of your honesty. None of this is your fault, by the way. These cracks were already there. You just stopped pretending they weren't. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, processing this information. The wedding postponed. My father apologizing, apparently. The family system destabilizing because one person had stopped accommodating its dysfunction. Part of me felt guilty, the old familiar pattern of taking responsibility for other people's reactions to my boundaries. But underneath that trained response was something clearer, recognition that I hadn't created this situation. I'd simply stopped pretending it didn't exist. A text from Amanda followed, Derek and I are seeing a therapist. He's finally willing to examine family patterns and his role in perpetuating them. Whatever you're doing in Iceland, keep doing it. You're creating space for truth in ways that are affecting everyone. Thank you for being brave enough to break the pattern. I replied simply, thank you for witnessing my truth when it would have been easier to go along with the family narrative. That support meant everything. As the sun emerged again from behind clouds, painting the harbor in gold light, I pulled out my camera and took one more photo. Not of landscape or contrast or metaphor, but a simple self-portrait. Me, on a bench in Iceland, hair windblown and face makeup free, smiling not because I was performing happiness but because I was genuinely content in this moment of uncertainty and becoming. I posted it to social media with a simple caption, Week 2 in Iceland. Learning that honest living requires constant courage, but the alternative, performing versions of yourself to please others, requires even more energy and costs infinitely more. Choose the hard work of authenticity over the exhausting work of performance. Within minutes, responses came flooding in. Friends I hadn't heard from in years. Former colleagues. People from my art classes. Even a few distant relatives who'd apparently been watching the family drama unfold and silently rooting for my escape. But one comment stood out, from my grandmother's old friend, a woman I barely remembered meeting at the funeral years ago. Your grandmother would be so proud. She always said you had her spirit but needed time to find it. She left for her own Iceland once, came back knowing exactly who she was. You're doing what she did. Welcome to the family tradition of women who choose themselves. I clicked on her profile and sent a private message, can we talk? I want to know more about my grandmother's journey. The response came quickly, I have boxes of her journals from that year she traveled. Letters she sent me describing her own awakening. Your mother asked me to destroy them after your grandmother died, said they were inappropriate and not the legacy we want to preserve. I kept them anyway. They're yours if you want them when you return. Evidence that resistance had a history in my family. That other women had walked this path before me. That I wasn't breaking tradition but reclaiming it. The last week in Iceland stretched before me, still full of possibility and discovery. But now it felt less like escape and more like preparation. I was gathering strength, clarity, evidence of who I could be when I stopped performing. Building a foundation to return to, one that would hold steady even when family pressure resumed. Because it would resume. I had no illusions about that. But I would meet it differently now, not from a place of desperate need for acceptance, but from solid ground of self-knowledge and supported by people who valued honesty over performance. Iceland had taught me that beautiful things could thrive in harsh conditions. Now I was learning to be one of those beautiful, resilient things myself. My final days in Iceland were spent in quiet reflection rather than constant activity. I'd seen the major sights, taken hundreds of photographs, filled my journal with observations and revelations. Now I needed to simply be present with what I'd learned, to let it settle into something I could carry back with me. I drove alone to a remote hot spring that Sigrid had recommended, far from tourist routes. The narrow gravel road wound through lava fields and past steaming vents, testing both my driving skills and my nerve. When I finally arrived, the spring was empty, a small pool of mineral-rich water surrounded by black rock and moss, steam rising into the cool air. I stripped down and slipped into the water, the heat shocking at first, then perfect. The silence was absolute except for wind and distant bird calls. No voices, no demands, no narratives to navigate. Just me and water and sky. I thought about the woman who'd arrived in Iceland 3 weeks ago, still reeling from family rejection, still questioning whether her hurt was legitimate or overblown. That woman had been so conditioned to doubt her own perceptions that she'd needed another country, physical distance, and multiple witnesses to believe her own experience was real. The woman sitting in this hot spring was different. Not healed completely, healing wasn't linear or finite. But fundamentally shifted in how she understood herself and her right to take up space in the world. My phone, which I'd been checking more regularly as my return date approached, showed a new email from my father. I almost didn't open it, not wanting to disturb the peace I'd found. But curiosity won. Natalie, I've been doing a lot of thinking since you left. Your mother and I have been in counseling, something I resisted for years but finally agreed to after Bradford started asking questions that I couldn't answer honestly without confronting some hard truths about our family patterns. The therapist used a term I'd never heard before, identified patient. Apparently that's what we've made you, the person who carries the family's dysfunction so the rest of us don't have to look at our own contributions to it. I'm ashamed to realize how accurate that description is. You were right about so many things. About the favoritism toward Vanessa, about your mother's need to control narratives, about my own conflict avoidance enabling harmful patterns. I don't expect you to forgive us immediately or maybe ever. But I want you to know that I'm finally seeing clearly, and I'm sorry. For all of it. For not protecting you, for not questioning the stories we told about you, for choosing peace over truth. Your grandmother would be disappointed in how I've handled things. She tried to teach me to value authenticity over appearances, but I forgot that lesson somewhere along the way. You've reminded me. Come home when you're ready. We'll be here, doing our own work regardless of whether you choose to be part of our lives going forward. You deserve that freedom. I read the email twice, checking for manipulation or hidden demands. But it seemed genuine, the kind of honest accounting I'd been desperate for but had given up expecting. It didn't fix everything, didn't erase years of harm. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that the problem wasn't my perception but the reality I'd been perceiving. I replied simply, "Thank you for this. I'll be home in 4 days. I'm open to conversations when I return, but I need you to understand that rebuilding trust will take time and consistent follow-through. Words matter, but actions matter more. I'm not the same person who left. I won't return to being the family mediator or the one who absorbs everyone else's discomfort. If you can accept that, we can find a new way forward." 2 days before my departure, Claire and I met for a final coffee. She was staying another week, having extended her trip after finding some peace in Iceland's stark beauty. "What are you taking back with you?" she asked, her hands wrapped around a mug of strong Icelandic coffee. "Evidence that I can trust myself. That my perceptions are valid even when everyone around me says they're not." That choosing myself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I paused, considering. And maybe most importantly, that family can be chosen as much as inherited. Amanda, Paige, even you're all family now in ways that matter more than biology. Claire nodded. I'm taking back permission to grieve on my own timeline. To not perform recovery for other people's comfort. Iceland taught me that some things just are what they are, and trying to prettify them or rush them dishonors their reality. We sat in comfortable silence, two women who'd arrived broken in different ways and were leaving with new frameworks for understanding their own experiences. On my last night in Iceland, I returned to the black sand beach at Vik where I'd first talked honestly with Claire. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors, the basalt sea stacks dark against the light. I set up my camera on a tripod and took one final self-portrait, this time including the vast landscape behind me. In the image, I was small against the scale of the beach and ocean and sky. But I wasn't diminished by that smallness. I was part of something larger, connected to this raw, honest landscape that had reflected back my own capacity for surviving harsh conditions with essential character intact. I posted the photo with a longer caption than usual. 3 weeks ago, I came to Iceland running from family rejection and towards something I couldn't quite name. I'm leaving with clarity about both. What I was running from was a family system that required me to doubt my own perceptions to maintain their comfort. What I was running toward was the version of myself that existed before I learned to make myself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold all of me. I'm going home different than I left. Not harder, but clearer. Not angry, but boundaried. Not broken, but breaking free. To everyone who's messaged support, thank you. To my family members who've done the work of honest self-examination while I've been gone, I see you and appreciate your courage. To those still invested in the old narratives, I wish you well, but I'm no longer available to participate in realities that require me to deny my own experience. Here's to living like Iceland, unapologetically authentic, beautiful precisely because it doesn't perform beauty, harsh when necessary but never dishonest about its nature. The responses came quickly, but one stood out. From Vanessa, my first direct communication with her since the group text weeks ago. I'm angry that you left and angry that Bradford started questioning everything because of you. But I'm also starting to see things I didn't want to see about how our family operates. Mom has been controlling narratives my whole life, and I've benefited from being the favored one, so I never questioned it. That was wrong. I don't know if I can change or if our relationship can be repaired, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to look honestly at my part in this. The wedding is postponed indefinitely. Bradford says we need to build something honest before we build something permanent. I hate that he's right. I stared at the message, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that Vanessa was finally seeing the patterns. Anger that it had taken this much for her to notice. Sadness that we'd lost so much time to dysfunction neither of us had created but both of us had perpetuated in different ways. I replied, "Thank you for this honesty. I don't know what our relationship looks like going forward either, but I'm willing to explore it if you're willing to keep examining these patterns rather than slipping back into comfortable dynamics. That's all I can offer right now." The flight home felt different than the flight out. I wasn't running anymore, wasn't escaping. I was returning, but on my own terms, carrying evidence of who I could be when I stopped performing for approval. Paige picked me up from the airport, pulling me into a fierce hug before I could even get my luggage loaded. "You look like yourself," she said, studying my face. "I mean, you always look like yourself, but now you look like you recognize yourself. Does that make sense?" Perfect sense. We drove back toward the city, Paige filling me in on final developments. My mother was in therapy but struggling with the idea that her behavior had been harmful rather than protective. Vanessa and Bradford were doing intensive couples counseling. Derek and Amanda were setting firm boundaries with my parents about future family interactions. The whole system was in upheaval, forced to examine foundations that had been unquestioned for decades. "Your apartment is exactly as you left it," Paige said. "Though there are about 40 packages on your doorstep. Looks like people have been sending you things." When we arrived, I found my neighbor Mrs. Reeves had collected everything and left it inside my door with a note, "Welcome home, dear." Heard about your adventure through the building grapevine. Proud of you for choosing yourself. The packages are mostly from your art students. They've been asking about you. I opened them one by one. Handmade cards from my senior art class students, small paintings they'd done in my absence, notes telling me about their progress and asking when I'd return to teaching. Evidence that I'd built something meaningful here, connections that existed independently of my family drama. The last package was from my grandmother's friend, the woman who'd mentioned the journals. Inside were 3 leather-bound notebooks, their pages yellowed with age, filled with my grandmother's handwriting. A note on top read, she wrote these during her year away, 1966 to 1967. Read them when you're ready. You'll see yourself in every page. She came back different too, stronger and clearer. It runs in the family, this need to break free and find yourself. Welcome to the tradition. I opened the first journal to a random page, day 47 in Paris. Today I realized that the version of myself I'd been performing for my family wasn't actually me at all, but a carefully constructed response to their expectations. Without their constant shaping, I'm discovering who I might have been all along. It's terrifying and exhilarating. I don't know what I'll find when I go back, but I know I can't return as the woman who left. She's gone, and I don't mourn her. I celebrate what's emerging in her place. I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by packages and journals and evidence of connections that honored rather than diminished me, and I cried. Not from sadness but from recognition, from understanding that I was part of something larger than my own individual struggle. That other women in my family had walked this path, that I was reclaiming a tradition that had been deliberately erased. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda, welcome home. Family dinner at our house tomorrow if you want. Just you, me, and Derek. No pressure, no agenda. Or not, if you need more space. Either way, we're here. I replied, tomorrow sounds good. Thank you for holding space for me while I found my way back to myself. That night, I unpacked my Iceland photographs and spread them across my apartment floor, curating them into a series for exhibition. Not the pretty landscape shots tourists took, but the honest ones. The contrasts, the harsh beauty, the evidence of things thriving in impossible conditions. I was one of those things now. Not despite the harsh conditions of family dysfunction, but having learned from them. Having discovered that I could survive, could bloom, could create meaning and beauty even when the ground beneath me was volcanic rock rather than fertile soil. The future was uncertain. My relationship with my family would require careful navigation and firm boundaries. My career was still rebuilding, my financial situation still precarious. But underneath all that uncertainty was something solid that hadn't existed before, unshakable knowledge of my own worth, independent of anyone else's validation or approval. I opened my journal to a fresh page and wrote, Day 1 of living like Iceland. Unapologetically authentic. Beautiful not despite my harshness but because of my honesty. Here's to choosing truth over performance, boundaries over belonging, integrity over approval. Here's to the long, difficult, essential work of becoming myself. Outside my window, Boston glowed with city lights, familiar and yet somehow new. I was home, but home meant something different now. Not a place where I performed an acceptable version of myself, but wherever I could exist fully, honestly, without apology. And that, I was learning, was a home I could carry with me anywhere. A home built not of other people's approval, but of my own hard-won self-recognition and acceptance. It wasn't perfect, wasn't complete, would require constant maintenance and defending. But it was mine. Authentically, unapologetically, completely mine. And that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.